Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 CCDEH training series. My name is Jeff Lamore, and I am the current president of CCDEH. The training series was developed by CCDEH's Professional Development Committee to make up for the cancellation of this year's CHA conference. Each session will be recorded, and CEUs will be available to all. The fee for each session is $25. You can go to CCDEH's video library. Tim's taking us there now. And each session has been recorded. The last 4 sessions have been recorded, and they are currently now posted for your viewing. There are also other CEU sessions that are available in the library, so please check those out as well. The next session is scheduled for next Thursday, May 13th. Please be aware that certificates will be issued by June 7th. There will be a question and answer period at the end of today's training session, so please use the Q&A function to submit your questions. Also, just to talk about the CEUs real quick, in order to obtain your CEUs, you must complete and submit the evaluation form at the end of each session. Please make sure you enter your full name and email address, and you can see that there. Tim is taking you to that page now. So make sure you do complete that in order to get your evaluations that I indicated. The certificates will be issued by June 7th. I'd like to thank Justin Milan, Cheryl Baldwin, Tim Snelling, and Freddie Agian for their work on developing the training series. With that, I'd like to introduce Mr. Charles Genkel, Environmental Health Director of Ventura County and co-chair of the Solid Waste and Resource Recovery Committee. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Charles.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for attending today. Today's presentation is titled Coordinating Local Agency Response to SP 1383. Most people attending are likely to have some familiarity with SP 1383 and the goal to reduce methane emissions from dairy and the solid waste sector. Oversight of the law and enabling regulations is pretty much fragmented, and it's falling on a variety of departments and agencies and counties and cities and various jurisdictions. So with today's training, we intend to highlight coordination efforts, potential roles and responsibilities, and potential impacts to local jurisdictions and environmental health programs to implement SB 1383. I've got 3 panelists here for you today, one from the state regulatory side, and one from the local EHD and LEA program, and a consultant for that was hired by a local jurisdiction. So we have Kyle Pogue, who's with CalRecycle. He manages the materials management section of CalRecycle, and he's responsible for helping expand organics infrastructure here in California, and he's helped develop the SB 1383 edible food recovery regulations. Rebecca Lustig, she's with Ventura County's Environmental Health Program and LEA. Rebecca also teaches at the Environmental and Occupational Health Program at Cal State Northridge. And then we have Garth Schultz. He's with R.E.H.S Consulting Group, and he's a locally hired contractor hired to implement SB 1383. He has extensive solid waste management experience in both the private and public sectors. He's skilled at designing a variety of solid waste and sustainability plans, and has served as a project manager on a wide variety of planning and program development projects for the management of solid waste. So with that, I'd like to get started. We're going to run you through a group of polling questions. If you can please, what you can do is take your camera and hold it up to the QR code on the screen, and it'll run you right to the polling questions. Just follow the directions on your phone, or you can go to slido.com and enter in the meeting number 2442, and you should be able to run through those questions. These questions are intended to facilitate some discussion for your panelists, so after those are completed, we'll roll right into the presentation.
So we can see
you're all seeing the first
42 people, 44 people.
Looks like we have quite a few people familiar with SB 1383.
Okay, so that gives you a sense. You want to move on to the next question?
Yes, that would be great. So the next question is, I'm sometimes unsure what material/waste is supposed to go into different colored bins. Let's see if we can get more people polling this time. 29, 35, 47, 51. Boy, split. Okay, we have about 71. We're ready to go to the next polling question. And SB 1383 requires local governments to implement organics collection and edible food recovery programs. Please select all the ways below that you see your department participating in this effort. All right, good. 37 so far, 40. It looks like a lot of people are picking A and D. And about half are picking C and D as well. All right, let's go on to the next polling question. Which entity do you think is responsible for enforcing organic waste collection/recovery activities at restaurants and supermarkets? Please pick one. Okay. Looks like a lot of you are choosing D for jurisdiction providing solid waste collection services. Interesting. Small percentages has no idea. All right, we're ready for the next polling question. What resources do you need to better understand SB 1383? Looks like a lot of people want training here today. So, all right, next question. It's our last one. Out of the options below, which do you think would be the most effective method of public outreach to educate people on resource reduction, edible food recovery, and food waste segregation? Please choose one. All right, we're at 47, 54. A lot of people are choosing D for social media campaign. All right. I think that concludes our polling session. I'd like to turn the presentation now over to our first panelist, which is Kyle Pogue with CalRecycle. As soon as his screen is shared, with Rebecca, we should be ready to go.
All right, good morning, everybody. Are you hearing me okay?
Yes. Does everyone
Great.
see the screen?
Yes, looks great.
Okay, looks like we're good to go. And Rebecca, I think you're advancing the slides. So, Charles, thank you for the introduction. Again, I'm Kyle Pogue with CalRecycle. Pleasure to be here with you guys today and share the stage with a couple of other experts on this topic. And I am going to do my best to give you a high-level overview of SB 1383. And I think you'll see through the course of our presentation, we'll dig a little bit deeper into aspects of this new law. And I do want to say this is not the first time I think that you've heard from CalRecycle. It's certainly not the last time. And on that note about ongoing training, we hear you loud and clear. So I'm happy to participate in future trainings and share information with you guys. I will say, and you can move to the next slide, please, Rebecca. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about SB 1383. This is California's short-lived climate pollutant law. And the reason CalRecycle is so interested in reducing short-lived climate pollutants is because of methane production in landfills in California. And what I'm going to share with you today, the regulations and requirements under that law, are a culmination of about 3.5 years of intensive stakeholder input. And I just wanted to acknowledge that those stakeholders included the waste and recycling industry, local governments, industry association, environmental groups, and many others, including CCDEH and the membership. So I want to thank you guys for your input to these regulations. It was definitely a team effort to get this done, and I am frankly happy to be through the regulatory process. So next slide, please, Rebecca. So to give you a scope and scale of the issue within California on organic waste, overall, there's about 40 million tons, let's say 38 million tons a year disposed material in California landfills. And about 2/3 of that material is organic material. And by organic material as defined in SB 1383, it's defined pretty broadly. It includes food waste, paper, cardboard, green waste, lumber, wood, digestate, manure, sledges, and some other organic materials as well. And that's reflected in this slide here and showing that really food waste is the single largest component at 18% of all material types of the waste stream. So food waste is a major portion of this effort. I also do want to point out there, and I will get to what the goals are of SB 1383, but there's a tremendous amount of food waste or food that is going to waste that could help feed food insecure Californians. So that's a portion of this law as well. So next slide, please, Rebecca. Okay, so this slide covers what those overall statewide goals are. So I want to be clear about that. These are statewide goals. They're not individual jurisdiction mandates. And there are 2 organic waste recycling targets in here of 50% in 2020. We're obviously already past that, and 75% in 2025. And then there's a third separate and distinct requirement that 20% recovery of currently disposed edible food needs to occur by 2025. I think it's also noteworthy in here to point out that SB 1383 is not a landfill ban on organics. Really what it does is it caps the amount of organic material that can go to California landfills, and that caps it based on our measurement system of a 2014 baseline at 5.7 million tons of organic materials disposed in California landfills. I think we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, so this slide really just reflects some key implementation dates on 1383, and obviously we're in 2021, so we could probably fast forward to that. The first years, again, we're engaged in the rulemaking process. So if we go right to 2021, you can see that, or 2022, excuse me, January 1, 2022 is really when the regulations take effect and state enforcement comes into play. And I'll cover that in a little more detail later. And then really the key important point here is that jurisdictions will need to have programs in place starting January 1, 2022, but that can occur over a time frame prior to January 2024, where enforcement starts coming into play. So, and I'll just point out January 1, 2025, the slides are a little bit funny here. Those boxes are a little bit funny, but that's where 75% organics disposal reduction comes in and the 20% edible goal needs to be achieved. So we can move on to the next slide, Rebecca. Okay, so main point I want to make here, moving from these statewide measurement goals. Really, SB 1383 is predicated on program implementation at a local level. It's really a program-based piece of legislation. And it does build on previous legislation that for example, AB 1826, which was mandatory commercial organics recycling. And there were predating laws to that too. So organics recycling, I think as we all know, is not new in California, but this really builds upon that effort, expands it. So the main components programmatically for local governments, local jurisdictions here, is that they need to provide organics collection services to all residents and businesses. Some jurisdictions are way out in front and already doing this. Others are working their way towards it. It's noteworthy in here that there will be the ability for some jurisdictions to receive waivers and maybe delay implementation, or they could be excluded and not have to implement certain programs based on, say, low population or a rural scenario, high elevation, things like that. And that standard bin colors need to really be used for collection programs. I'll talk a little bit more about the edible food recovery program in another slide. Education and outreach is an important component of this. And really, we need that to ensure that Californians are participating well in organics collection. And that's no small feat. There's going to be a lot of education outreach needed there. That they're aware of edible food donation and that it's linguistically available to many people so they can understand it in diverse populations. So procurement also, our next thing, there are requirements on local governments to buy back what they are helping divert, whether that's compost, mulch, bioenergy, biofuels. There are requirements built into that to participate in procuring those materials. And then we also, they need to be participating, local governments need to be participating in food recovery capacity building as well as organics recovery capacity building as well. And then there are requirements to monitor compliance, get people into compliance, and then conduct enforcement where necessary. Next slide, please. Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, so this slide, and I will acknowledge, I believe Garth's going to go into a little bit of detail on this in his presentation too, but I think what this slide illustrates is that there is a role for everybody within 1383. You know, whether it's at a city council board of supervisors level where they need to adopt enforceable ordinances for this, where it could be on a city manager or CEO level to help develop capacity to handle organics and edible food recovery, or it's legal departments reviewing those enforceable ordinance or helping establish new fees. Talked a little bit about procurement requirements, or that's public works, right? Working on establishing expanded hauler agreements and helping develop recycling facilities for this. But I want to focus a little bit on the environmental health aspect of it. And, you know, this is where I want to recognize that your departments are very diverse. And so it really depends on how you're structured. And this is all subject to coordination and discussion with your local government colleagues on how to implement this program. I could see environmental health having a role in, whether that's certainly from a local enforcement agency perspective on enforcing state minimum standards for solid waste facilities. And we have a lot of detail about that came through the technical training series for LEAs. Maybe there is involvement in environmental health and inspection of commercial edible food generators, but that's not a requirement. So that's something that will need to be vetted locally and established that way. So I think we can move on. Okay, so I put this slide in here a little bit, and just a quick go back. I did want to recognize, from the poll questions, I'm really excited to see that it's probably about a 60-40 split there on those that know about SB 1383. So this is one of the more detailed components of SB 1383. I was most involved in this commercial edible food generator discussion and edible food specifically. And this slide here really reflects the commercial edible food generators that were chosen to roll out in a tiered structure. And tier 1 commercial edible food generators really, and they need to start helping recover their excess edible food by January 1, 2022. Apologies, it's not on this slide, but this includes wholesale food vendors, food service providers and distributors, and grocery stores and supermarkets. And the reason these were chosen in tier 1 is they were more accustomed to participating in food recovery opportunities. They also typically generated the types of foods that were more readily recoverable versus our tier 2 generators that come in 2 years later in 2024 that deal a little bit more in the prepared foods. And we recognize that's a more difficult proposition to manage those foods. But I want to acknowledge all of this food has to be recovered consistent with the California Retail Food Code, right? Extremely important. And that's where I see obviously a role for public health departments to ensure that when food is recovered or when food is managed in general, that it's done safely. And that's what you guys do. There are other components to this portion of the law that really include education and outreach for local governments, capacity planning, like I mentioned before. We need to build and expand these food recovery networks that are not as robust as they need to be thus far, and that there will be enforcement on non-compliant commercial edible food generators. There are also reporting and inspection requirements for food recovery organizations. Those are pretty simple, more based on their record keeping. But this portion of the law is by far the most unique, in my opinion, of all of these requirements in SB 1383. And this has not really been done elsewhere within the world. France has touched on this a little bit, but this is very new. And then there's a federal facility reference in here. They are not required to participate. They certainly can on a voluntary level. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. Okay, so this touches on some jurisdiction requirements that I haven't hit on directly yet. There is an ordinance requirement to adopt an enforceable ordinance on SB 1383 by January 1, 2022. Some jurisdictions have already done that. Many are still working on it. Let's see. There's compliance and monitoring and education, and that's kind of on an annual level. And I won't dive too deeply into that, but really, if I had to leave you with anything, it's really adopt an ordinance by 2022, really work closely with these jurisdictions from 2022 to 2024 to really help get them into compliance, and provide, identify businesses by the end of that time frame that are out of compliance, and work with them through a process to get them into compliance. And in 2024, that's where enforcement comes in, but there is a progressive approach to this. So it does not go right to fines and penalties. And that's not really the intent of this. The intent is to achieve compliance. One thing that CalRecycle will help set when it comes to getting generators into compliance, getting participants into compliance, is a maximum time frame in which they can do that. So we'll be working with local jurisdictions on that. So next slide, please. So this is really where it gets into CalRecycle's oversight. And I touched on this earlier, but there is the ability to authorize waivers, which could be extensions of timeframes, or in some case allow them not to participate in certain aspects of the program. Let's see. I do want to point out that when it comes to state agencies and local education agencies, so public schools, for example, fall under the jurisdiction of CalRecycle for compliance. That's not enforced at a local level. We do ask locals to provide education and outreach to those entities, but enforcement happens on a CalRecycle level. And then what will happen is CalRecycle will really evaluate jurisdiction compliance over this time. So CalRecycle will look specifically at the jurisdictions. How are they doing at implementing the prescriptive requirements within SB 1383? Really back to those program elements. Are they doing what they're supposed to be doing there? And if there are substantial efforts that still remain to be done, there can be a corrective action plan put into place with subsequent timelines to make those corrections. And then, so really just without diving into too much detail on this, because there's a lot more to this and more information to come on how CalRecycle's oversight will roll out, but there will be time to achieve compliance as we move forward into SB 1383. Okay, so let's keep moving here. I wanted to share that CalRecycle has a lot of tools already developed. We have a model franchise agreement. We have a mandatory organics disposal reduction ordinance, procurement policy, a food recovery agreement, and really want to thank CCDEH, some of the members, for reviewing our model food recovery agreement and providing input into that. These are models. They do not have to be used, but I think they are helpful to local governments. We're also working on capacity planning tools. How do you figure out how much organics is being disposed within your jurisdiction? What type of capacity do you have secured to manage that? Tools that help inform that, and also edible food recovery tools as well. How do you identify a tier 1, tier 2 commercial edible food generator? And how do you calculate how much excess edible food is available for recovery? We also have a procurement calculator that's in the works. That's out there and we'll be sharing. And then we've been doing lots of webinars and information sharing, and there's more of that to come. I think we've done about 6 regional webinars, so local governments and others have been part of those regional webinars. My experience is like 200 or 300 per webinar. We're participating in that. And then there was a specific webinar on solid waste facility requirements too. And more to come. So next slide, please. These slides a little basic sounding, but I just wanted to make sure that I reinforced these points. That I really recognize, I think CalRecycle recognized that CCDEH member departments are very diverse, and you do different things. from rural to really largely urban departments. It really depends. So I wanted to let you know that we recognize that, and that we hear you loud and clear on the need for training. And that came through in the polling questions as well. And we're here to help teach you about that and help coordinate with you at a local government level too, when it comes to sharing this information. And the last thing was a thank you. I just wanted to recognize that the work you guys do is so important. And I know there's been a lot of stressors in this recent COVID crisis and beyond. And I just want to personally recognize that, let you know I see that, and we really appreciate the work that you do. Next slide, please. And then here's some contact information that you can tap into. We have a listserv, but if you do have specific questions, say about, because I've really touched highly on this stuff, but about solid waste facilities and so forth, reach out to your permitting point of contact at CalRecycle, but also engage in the, you can send emails to our SLCP inbox, and we have lots of web resources. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Rebecca to take it from here. And apologies, I moved so fast. I hope it's helpful.
Thank you, Kyle. So I just wanted to remind everyone that we are getting your Q&A questions, and so we're going to have the time for all the Q&A questions at the end after all three presenters. So I'm Rebecca Lustig. I'm the supervisor over our LEA staff in Ventura County, but I also spent quite some time in our food program doing restaurant inspections, and some time being the land use specialist doing discretionary reviews. So my section of this presentation, I'm really going to focus on environmental health roles and challenges that we've identified. So how might 1383 affect environmental health staff and programs? So as we heard, SB 1383 has goals and programs that are directed at food. So edible food recovery and even the diversion of these wastes from landfills from these facilities. Clearly, there's going to be some hand in food program staff, or food program staff is going to see an effect in their facilities. And then, of course, local enforcement agencies, LEA staff. Clearly, we're going to have some new facilities. We're going to have some nuisance and some complaints that are going to be coming out of things to address, record reviews, and community engagement, as we normally would. So Kyle already went over this, the mandated food donors per Title 14. This is just a summary of them here. We certainly see these types of facilities in Ventura County that are going to need to make some operational and maybe facility changes in order to meet their role and be compliant with SB 1383. So what are some of the challenges that we may see here? So making sure food is donated safely, educating food operators and staff and the public. So we'll see, different types of approaches for that. The storing of this food waste for diversion. And then, the big question is who enforces what? This last one's kind of the head scratcher, because we have, as our poll indicated, there's a lot of different options that could potentially be out there, but the majority of people gave that answer. It's the entity that has jurisdiction over food waste collection. And so we're going to see that in some of the laws as well. So food facility donations. So on this part is about food facility donations and that edible food recovery component. So we want to make sure that food is being recovered to feed hungry people, that it's safe and wholesome. That's essential. A lot of the sections in California Health and Safety Code that focuses on food facility donations, who can donate, and also the California Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, the AB 1219. Ventura County, we're a big food producer. However, we do have studies that show that 1 in 6 county residents faces food insecurities. So we have organizations in the county that focus on this redistribution of surplus food. So edible food recovery, this is actually one of the areas that Environmental Health Food Program staff has a a bit of an effect and some specific requirements. So although the majority of California Health and Safety Code talks about the food facility donors and their protections and liabilities under the Good Samaritan Donation Act, we also have a section 114435 that says specifically enforcement officers shall promote the recovery of food fit for consumption during normal routine inspections. So this promotion could be newsletters, bulletins, handouts, letting food donors know their protections and liabilities. So this seems, kind of normal. Enforcement officers, in food program staff, we go into food facilities, we make sure that food that's being consumed by people is sanitary, it's healthy, it's wholesome, it meets Cal Code requirements, and talking to people, talking to public, talking to operators about California Health and Safety Code. Environmental health staff, food program staff does this regularly. But what about some of the other components of this? What about segregating and separating foods? Who enforces that? And how might that affect a food facility? So enforcement we'll get to in a second, but first let's continue to talk about the separation and the storage. So food restaurant waste, we can break that down into our pre-consumer and post-consumer. Your pre-consumer waste is anything that is thrown away before it's being served to the guests. So food that wasn't used because it's spoiled. Byproducts of your food prep process, the ends of your vegetables or cores, or potentially facilities that are using time as a public health control that didn't get served, or even some of that packaging that this gets served in. Your post-consumer food waste is going to be the front of the house stuff, so the food scraps that the guests don't consume, that the guests leave behind. So it's important to know how, what materials are recyclable and compostable in a particular jurisdiction, and that's going to be different from city to city and unincorporated, and from county to county throughout the state. So obviously training to make sure that people aren't doing aspirational recycling and putting something in a bin that isn't supposed to go in that bin is key. We saw from our poll at the beginning that even as environmental health professionals, we're sometimes unsure what goes into which bin. And if we're unsure, then the public is definitely unsure. So there's that training, and some of that outreach is going to be easier in like your chain restaurants or your supermarkets. They normally have a standardized employee program. Like a place like a Cheesecake Factory is going to have a program that can affect all their locations that you wouldn't see in like a mom and pop place. There could be issues with finances and resources, or just simply buying into the concept of managing food waste and the understanding of it. And then we also have those requirements for the big events. Ventura County, we have lots of events. One of which is our Ventura County Fair. So that's 2 weeks worth of a lot of different food vendors from all over the state, from outside of the state that comes in, public attendance from outside of the county, people walking around, maybe not quite sober, maybe not quite paying attention to where they're being told to separate out these foods. So how can food waste be managed at these events, being stored, not creating vermin issues, that sort of things, or even how can these events maybe skew or derail some of these diversion efforts. And where to store your food scraps, inside or outside. So is that something that the operator is going to need to purchase, or is that something that's going to be provided by these waste collection services, by that franchise agreement? It's going to be different from area to area. Is this new container going to take up valuable storage space? How might this upset the flow of the operation inside the facility that could either result in an unsanitary condition inside that restaurant, or potentially the staff not separating the food correctly or the food scraps correctly or at all? Are you going to have inspectors that are going to walk in one day and see some of that essential dry storage moved or gone in order to accommodate some new bins or a scrap bin? So could this change, or this new container equipment potentially require food plan check review for a change in the facility? Is it going to potentially increase vermin coming into the facility and creating, a harborage issue there? And what about your outdoor waste enclosures? So food inspection staff, I was in their food program for about 7.5 years. And I remember going to inspections, and I remember seeing the outdoor trash enclosure looking like we see in the picture here. Lids open, some issues there with vermin and pests or those attractants, birds, rodents. And very often that restaurant or market owner isn't the only business that uses this receptacle. So the violations or the issues that are going to be with this food diversion or organic separation in these outdoor bins, could that be potentially derailed because the public has access to it, or these other businesses, non-food businesses, are going to have access to this shared enclosure? So how is that going to interfere with the quality of the organics being diverted from the landfills? Is this now going to be a rejected load? So a lot of these questions are coming into play as how is it going to be separated out? And then the big question, who enforces what? So who's supposed to enforce this food facilities that engage in edible food recovery or activities, and also this separation or the segregation for organics for recovery for composting, keeping it out of landfills? So let's start with just definitions in code. California Health and Safety Code defines an enforcement officer, and we saw that phrase in the Food Donation Act, that enforcement officer goes in and they're supposed to promote edible food recovery and provide handouts and information. So as an enforcement officer, this is the director, agents of environmental health specialists appointed by the states and so forth. So food staff going into restaurants, that's an enforcement officer. To this point, anything that we see in Health and Safety Code or in Title 14, we're not seeing enforcement officer. So that responsibility hasn't been delegated to food inspection staff outside of simply providing that information, which, as I mentioned before, making sure that people know how to handle food and store food safely and according to Cal Code, and providing information about what protections are for Good Samaritan and Health and Safety Code. That's just par for the course for a lot of food program staff. We're comfortable with that. But what about Title 14? In Title 14, the requirements for edible food recovery for facilities, just having a program, and also the organic waste recovery, the oversight is delegated to jurisdictions. And a jurisdiction is defined in Title 14, city and county, or a special district that provides solid waste collection services. So if you look through a lot of these SB 1383, Title 14, jurisdiction is the entity that's being called out. A jurisdiction can use a joint powers of authority to maybe, come into agreements, delegate out to other entities, but ultimately the jurisdiction is responsible for it. So the most popular choice in our poll was definitely the jurisdiction that's providing these services. So that is correct. But if a jurisdiction enters into a JPA, so that's your joint powers of authority, which is a legally created entity that allows 2 or more public agencies to exercise power, then it could potentially be code enforcement, it could be food staff, but that needs to be established. So food inspectors cannot, as currently written, enter a food facility and enforce Title 14 that's actually delegated to another entity in Title 14. I know that there was this talk that there was an assertion that there was, food inspection staff, you're already there, why not you do the enforcement? And the answer isn't necessarily no, but, people don't like to be volunteered for things, and environmental health directors certainly don't like their staff to be volunteered for things. And we want to have this discussion and collaboration. Want to make sure that this is actually, something you can put your finger on. If any action is taken for non-compliance, it's going to elicit the question, under what authority did you write this correction? And that authority needs to be legally established and likely codified through a legislative body like a city council or a board of supervisors in a county. So each of these discussions with the county environmental health and each jurisdiction is going to be different and separate. Maybe some environmental health departments are willing and able to assume the role in a JPA, but others won't. It's going to be dependent on resources like staffing, training, knowledge. What does it mean to be in compliance or out of compliance? What is correct? What does incorrect look like? How is enforcement done? Are we going to do citations, notice of violations? Are there going to be fines? Are we going to take people to administrative hearings? And through all of this inspection and these actions, what about funding? If a jurisdiction develops a new section to enforce, they need to staff and have additional funds, and there's some points in Title 14 that says you can recover those costs. Well, it's the same thing with environmental health departments. We're fee offset. We need to make sure that any new asks that are being created or new programs need to be funded. So environmental health, a city or county code enforcement staff, whichever entity comes into this agreement or does these actions, needs to have some sort of a funding. So, right now it's May, and in Ventura County, we've already submitted budgets and fee resolution proposals for the fiscal year for 21 to 22. So new programs and agreements by January 1, 2022 may be difficult if they haven't already started. So a lot of discussions and evaluations need to take place. It's not automatic, and it's going to look different for everybody. So next, the actual facilities. So LEA responsibilities, as Kyle mentioned, we have state minimum standards. LEA enforces these. So a lot of these requirements are not necessarily new under 1383, but they do have, some modifications, some differences, and some challenges. So LEAs, we review permits, new and modified. We provide information to the public about these permits, notifications, excluded activities. So that's a key responsibility. Providing public information. So under Title 27 of California Code of Regulations, the LEA and the operator, the applicant, needs to create public notice, do a public meeting, or substitute public meeting under like a land use authority under CEQA. LEA staff will respond to public complaints about facilities. LEA can also, under 1383, approve alternate sampling protocols for incompatible materials. Verify record keeping of diverted organics. So in a nutshell, facility operators taking their samples needs to measure their incompatible materials against their organics recovered, and all of these different waste streams need to be recorded. So LEA would go in, verify record keeping, materials are going to the correct facilities, and if measurements look a little off or they don't reflect the records, then the LEA can require actions in order to bring that facility back into compliance with record keeping of their diverted materials. So what are some of the challenges for environmental health or for LEAs because of SB 1383? So some of the challenges are siting and permitting facilities and deadlines. So commercial composting facility, Ventura County, can only go, and I'm sure in other jurisdictions, can only go into a place that has the correct zoning designation for that type of business. So working with the county planning or city planning, potentially looking at these ordinances, and if there's a really great place that you think one of these facilities can go into, but it's not zoned for it, getting a variance or amending a text amendment to a general plan in order to allow it. Looking at these facilities, they need infrastructure. They need water, sewer, roads. All of these things need to go into these type of facilities. These are manned facilities. They have employees. They have customers coming in. It needs to be cited so it's not creating a public nuisance. So this affects your timelines, which then in turn affects deadlines. So identifying the appropriate site, completing the discretionary review process and getting your CEQA documentation in order, doing outreach, getting your public input and buy-in, submitting this application to the LEA for the actual permit to operate this facility, getting that complete and correct, getting concurrence from CalRecycle. All of this needs to happen before anything can start up. And this deadline is just around the corner. And what about nuisances? So odor, litter, vectors, pests, these types of things. So LEA, this is always a challenge for LEAs, is dealing with the nuisances being created for these types of facilities. So new facilities that are coming up need to know that they need to be addressing these things. It's going to be very site specific and to the neighborhood, and existing facilities that are making changes. So say that you have an existing green material only facility that wants to now incorporate some feedstock. They're going to need to modify those plans, modify those odor plans, modify their permit, to do outreach to the community. It doesn't just automatically, they're not automatically able to start. Getting community buy-in and engagement, I got a slide on that. And then of course, the ever-present coordination between jurisdictions. So here's our odor wheel. People should be familiar with this. So say, for example, operators proposing new places, we need to figure out how to manage these odors, train the community on how to differentiate these odors, about the different strengths of the odors and the types of the odors and different smells. We look at this type of thing and, quick processing of feedstock before things get too ripe. Maybe an indoor operation would be better in some areas. So all of these things would need to be addressed to manage odors. And you look at even the wheel. Some of these things actually seem like they'd smell pretty nice. We have things that are fragrant and fruity and piney, lemon, grassy. But you start introducing some food waste stock into this, and this is going to change. You're going to get more, rancid, putrid, fishy, those sort of things. So knowing the differences between the types of odors being produced by different feedstock. And community engagement. So as we mentioned before, residents need training, time to get used to, what type of diversion is going to be in their area. Are they going to be a mixed organics or a source separated organics? And they need tools to make better decisions regarding source reduction and segregation of these wastes. But communities also have a right to be part of the permitting process. LEAs are responsible for, some public meetings or attending public meetings and a substitute public meeting. But SB 1383, or specifically Title 27, these sections, we have an additional environmental justice component to address disadvantaged communities. So the LEA is required to encourage attendance and take measures to encourage attendance to disadvantaged communities. So the informational meeting needs to be held at a time and place that's going to promote attendance by these communities. Disadvantaged communities can be identified geographically, socioeconomically, public health, pollution criteria using some tools such as EnviroScreen. And each community is going to come with its own challenges and questions. So different approaches will be needed for different communities and different people. As we saw from the poll, there's a preferred outreach. So the majority of people thought that a social media campaign would be effective. I'd say that's probably a pretty good idea. Doing mailers, doing robocalls, just posting in a public place, that's not where people get their information. So you need to be aware of where that community gets their information and tailor it to it. When we talk about outreach, it's not just ticking a box. It's meaningful outreach that's going to communicate to the population that you're trying to reach. So translations and also providing resources for non-literate populations. So working together and moving forward, collaboration and communication, identifying and acknowledging that there are challenges. Regulations are written the way that they're written. So if we need to create ordinances and agreements and JPAs and all of that, start having these conversations now. If we need to provide more training for staff, or maybe we need new staff, you need to start growing your programs. Enforcement decision, who's going to do what? And under what authority is that going to take place? We need to figure those things out. And also, what if some of these choices don't work? Some of the concerns is there's a sustainable market. So all of this organic that's being diverted, turning into soil amendment and compost, are we going to saturate the market and create a surplus of a product that has no home, and now it's just going to become a waste anyway? Some say that the market will always be there and you can never get enough, and others say we don't believe this is sustainable. We don't know that yet. Only time will tell. Same thing with any of the programs that are coming forward. A lot of these decisions that are being made now, we're not going to know if they work yet until at least the first quarterly reporting period for organics and incompatible materials recovery, and see if we need to, kind of address this moving target and change some of the programs and implementations. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Garth.
And I promise I'll cover my piece in 3 minutes or less, because I know we may have a number of folks with questions on this topic. So I'm Garth Schultz, a consultant to local governments, cities, towns, counties, special districts, joint powers authorities throughout the state. We're one of many firms throughout the state working with local governments on their implementation plans for SB 1383. If you can go to next slide, Rebecca, please. The main thing that I want to share today is just kind of how to establish a collaboration with others within your organizations. Essentially to help you with some guidance, best practices, and next steps on how EH&S departments can collaborate well with public works departments, integrated waste management departments, code enforcement, contractors, consultants. And what I wanted to highlight here, and I stole 2 slides from Kyle's earlier part of the presentation, largely to highlight that, yes, every local department plays a role in SB 1383, but those roles don't line up neatly with the jurisdiction responsibilities. If you can go to the next slide, Rebecca. So the jurisdiction, the jurisdiction agencies or departments have, responsibilities, but there may be shared responsibilities between the various obligations of SB 1383. For example, with respect to procuring recyclable and organic products, there may be a centralized procurement agent or agency, or it may be dispersed, or it may be both simultaneously. And so multiple departments will be involved in that. And certainly with respect to compliance and code enforcement, Rebecca and Kyle have already covered the fact that collaboration between EH&S, LEAs, food safety inspectors, code enforcement, others designated with administrative citation ability, all of that collaboration is going to be necessary. So the main thing we want to highlight is that they don't line up directly, and you have to have some patience in terms of figuring it out as you go along. Next slide, please. So I've covered kind of a few best practices in local agency coordination that we are both seeing within the clients that we work with throughout the state and that we know other agencies are moving forward with. So certainly communicating and engaging with others in your local jurisdiction is important. In Ventura County right now, there's an effort underway to convene heads of various agencies, departments, and divisions to collaboratively establish who will have what responsibilities, not necessarily to point fingers and say, well, you're food safety, you must be responsible for this, but really to engage in a dialogue. Important to go into it knowing that roles and responsibilities may be shared, or new areas of responsibility or new activities within certain departments may need to be established in order to meet the obligations under the law. Convening jurisdiction-wide planning meetings throughout your agencies is important, but also remember there's other regional efforts underway, whether that's countywide or with joint powers authorities, or even just, informal collaborations between multiple agencies with similar interests and obligations. You can plug into those efforts, especially around things like edible food recovery, engaging in inspections and enforcements and reporting. And I'll give a couple examples on the next slide of some efforts that are working. But overall, be flexible and adaptable in your approach. There certainly is no one size fits all. For smaller agencies, these duties may all be undertaken under one roof or even with one person, whereas with the larger agencies, it very much is going to be a community-based approach. Next slide. So these are a few of the agencies throughout the state that we've worked with or that we know are working on some kind of innovative collaborative efforts. I mentioned that there's a countywide working group underway in the county of Ventura, which is seeking to establish and affirm roles and responsibilities by agency. Sacramento County is a good example where they have an environmental health department that is contracting out inspections with the cities that want to pay for it. So they've got cities and towns within Sacramento County that are actually establishing contracting relationships to pay direct for inspections and enforcement of services. Nevada County is another example, working in collaboration with one of the cities in their county to move forward just now on SB 1383 planning and innovation. I put that up there mostly to say if you haven't started yet, it's not too late and you're not behind the pack necessarily. A number of folks are just getting underway now. There are a number of solid waste joint powers authorities throughout the state that are also good to tap into, and that they are working actively to complete either specific plans for their member agencies or just coordinate members, cities, towns, special districts throughout the agency so that they have shared information and shared resources. And in some cases, providing funding for member agencies. In Zero Waste Marin, they're establishing, essentially a reimbursement program to their local agencies to initially solve this question of how do we fund at least even these planning and early coordination efforts. And then individual agencies themselves are usually coordinated at the Public Works Director or City Manager or Integrated Waste Services level. For those of you working in the LEA and environmental health and food safety space, those are the folks also to kind of tag up with as you move forward in establishing collaboration. And I will close it there because I know we're at time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Garth, Rebecca, and Kyle. That concludes our presentation for today. I have to say it was very informative. We do have a Q&A session right now. Kyle, I know that you have some time constraints, and those of you that have submitted your questions and comments, I know Kyle responded to you already, but I know we are seeing a lot of questions that come up related to the waivers, and I didn't know if Kyle, if you have time, can you expand on that a little bit for us?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Charles, I can't too much. I mentioned that in the chat feature. I don't know the current status on waivers. My impression is they've yet to be submitted, but I'm going to have to double back because that's not something that I'm part of at this point. So, and I know I've got Marcus on the line here. That's also part of our team, and he and I can take that back and do a little research for you. I am seeing a lot of questions on definitions as well. Tried to answer a few of those, but what I'd say is please send your questions to the SLCP inbox that I referenced, and we'll try and get responses back to you. But happy to come back with some more information on waivers as that evolves. I'm sorry you don't have that answer.
Okay, thank you. We do have one additional question. I'm not sure who this would go to, but the question is, one of the slides showed an overflowing dumpster. Not all dumpsters have a door on top which can be locked. How do you keep the homeless folks from going through the dumpster and making a mess?
That's why it was identified as one of the challenges. So at least in Ventura County, that's a concern. Actually, one of our public works people from our integrated waste management informed me that they're working right now on guidelines for trash enclosures and wanted to speak directly to that sort of thing about access, not just from the public or from homeless people, but also from businesses that share that enclosure that may not be as concerned about locking it or closing the lids as a food facility would be. So I would say you can look at what trash enclosure guidelines there are for commercial facilities or specifically commercial food facilities, if it is specific, in your jurisdiction, and see if there's a way you can get in on that conversation.
Okay. We got another question that came in. What is the expected method used to verify amount earned by facilities requiring submission of the previous year's tax returns or multiple years tax returns for an average? Sounds like a CalRecycle question that might need to be deferred after the training session.
Yeah, Charles, I'm not sure if I am quite understanding that question. Please send it to us. I'll take a look at it.
Okay. With that, I don't see any other questions coming in. At this time, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and I'd like to turn this back over to Jeff Lamore, and thank you for attending.
All right, thank you, Charles. And also a big thank you to Kyle, Rebecca, and Garth. Thank you very much. Great presentation. Just a reminder, the next training session is scheduled for May 13th. With that, make sure you get your evaluations completed before, I think it's May 27th. You can get all that information in, or I actually think it's June 4th. Get your evaluations in, and that should get us going so we can get the certificates issued by the 7th of June. Again, thank you all, and everybody have a great day.